Serious people who have accidentally caused the death of another person. What happened? I was driving from a friend's house last November on a road I've driven a million times. I knew one area was particularly dark at night because the city hadn't replaced the street lights in over a decade. The dark area also crests a hill in a residential area between two crosswalks that are far apart, so people cross the road at the top of this hill. Knowing all this, I still never saw him coming. There was a huge thud, and my window was cracked all the way across. I turned around and saw him laying motionless on the sidewalk. It was late and no one else was there, so it was just me, parked on a side street, and this body. I checked his pulse while I was on the phone with 911 but couldn't feel anything because I was shaking so badly. This was maybe a quarter mile from the hospital, so the paramedics were there before I even realized what happened. They put him up on a stretcher with this strange device that I found out later was to automatically compress his chest. The cops showed up, and I finally saw my car with a flashlight. There was a large chunk of flesh and blood caught on the side of my car. I passed my sobriety test and they took me home. He lived for 3 days before dying due to complications of the accident and was never conscious during that time. I found out through a friend of mine who's the editor at a local paper that the police were still considering charges. Also how I found out that he died. I was obviously a mess about the accident, but also the possibility of involuntary manslaughter. After the officer called me to tell me officially that he died, I consulted a lawyer and was basically told not to talk to the police again and to let them conduct their investigation. 2 grueling weeks later, I got a phone call at midnight from the officer who gave me my sobriety test. He worked third shift. He told me that the guy was incredibly intoxicated and basically stepped into oncoming traffic without paying attention. With that info, I wasn't to be charged and I could go pick my car back up. The relief I felt was indescribable, but also terrible that I could feel so great in a situation where someone died. What made that feeling worst was that the officer told me the family of the guy were super concerned with how I was doing and that they wanted to tell me they didn't blame me. He was 24 and had just graduated college. It was his last night in town before going back to his hometown. I go to his Facebook page every once in a while just so I don't forget what he looked like. Sorry if this comes through as rambling, but I've been actually explained this in writing before. Edit. Clarified/spelling on a few things. Edit 2. Thank you all very much for your words. There aren't a ton of people I can talk to about this because they just get super sad and coddling, so it's a strange breath of fresh air to get some of this stuff out in the open. Thank you. I'm not sure if this counts, but I wanna get it off my chest after reading these. My friend was a well-known and liked guy. Very social. Did drama, football, and baseball in high school. Some of the best moments of my life was with him. One day he just stopped coming around. He would read my messages but not reply. He ignored anyone else. It was so bizarre. One day, he came to my house, and it was like the good old days. He said he got into target shooting, but his gun blew up because he fired a bullet that had been in the washing machine. He had some powder burns on his hands. He asked to borrow one of my guns, and I said yes. 2 days later he shot himself with it. I've hated myself since. Most of our mutual friends hate me. His family hates me, and I was barred from his funeral. I feel so bad I didn't see the signs. I miss you, Tom. I wish I could have helped you, like you did me. Edit. To clarify, he borrowed my gun. Also, thank you all so much for your words of support. I wish people here could see things how you did. It's taken years, but I no longer blame myself for what happened. It still haunts me. He was being himself that day, laughing, joking, and making plans for us to hang out more. I'll let him borrow the gun without a second thought because I got lost in the moment, plus, as soon as I said yes, he carried on like it was no big deal. We grew up with guns. A lot of people don't see that. Most never asked. To them, I'm the piece of shit who gave him the gun. Plus Tom was very popular person and I never was. So I guess it's easier for them to demonize me. It still hurts though. I wish I could have talked to him about how he was feeling. I wish he'd shown a sign of sadness, something to clue me in. Every day, I spend time playing the what if game. I get everyone who knew him lost someone special, but so did I, and it's like I'm not allowed to grieve for him publicly. Former paramedic here. We tend to have a fair share of what we ourselves consider deaths we are responsible for. You don't always interpret all situations right. There are days your hands are a tiny bit shaky and you miss that vein or trachea, etc. But I will always remember the first one as a fresh paramedic. 65 years old male with chest pain. Just had his birthday yesterday. Now presents with chest pain. For this we give nitroglycerin as a spray. Works well, but has a downside. It reacts massively and violently with Viagra, etc., which was a brand new drug on the market back then. I asked the patient if he took any medication. He says no. Now the seasoned paramedics already know where this is heading. I of course forgot to ask the wife to leave the room and ask again. Because he visited a hooker for his birthday. He crashed half a minute after I gave him the nitroglycerin, and despite all efforts died on scene. Edit, as it is asked a lot. We found out about his secret birthday party via the police investigation. Every death that is non-expected in my country mandates a police investigation to rule out any wrongdoings. One of his friends told police the truth, and I'm fairly sure the family received the police report as well. Edit 2. Nowadays it is protocol for most services to explain to the patient that he will most likely die if he has taken any Viagra, etc. The consequences were known back then, 1999, merely months after it became available in my neck of the woods as well, but we weren't as explicitly trained on it. It needed a few cases like the one above to change training and push that scenario into every healthcare professional's mind. War survivor from Chechnya 94-96 war. I told a girl, maybe 17 years old, to run out from the apartment building because I was so sure it was going to collapse. It didn't collapse, and she ran out into a hail of gunfire and died. I was so scared that I stayed in the building and it just never collapsed the entire time, so I left out the back. I often think about that. It was such a quick decision. She was right near the door. I was on my way out because the building felt like it was shaking, and I saw her and said, run out, the roof is gonna fall. And she ran out in a hurry and got blown apart by gunfire, shrieking in pain until she was hit again and presumably died. I wish I didn't tell her that, obviously. It still sort of haunts me to this day, especially her screaming. But I also know that I made the decision in goodwill, trying to save her life. And to be fair, the building really felt like it was going to collapse, and everyone was running out, not just me. Anybody would have told her to run as well. Nobody knew they were opening fire on the building. I know it sounds like lame justifications, but it is all I can think of to help ease my mind. Anybody would have done the same. I hope, at least. Warning, this is a faked up story, with only losers. I was 14 years old. It was a Sunday afternoon, somewhere in Europe. I was returning from a soccer match with my dad and two neighbors, friends of my dad. Going through my neighborhood, we met a new neighbor. They had moved in a few weeks earlier. He was returning from a hunting trip and was unloading a couple of rifles from his car. We said hello and chatted for a bit. Curious, 14-year-old me couldn't take my eyes off the rifles. I had never before seen anything like it up close. He noticed and asked if I wanted to hold it. Of course I wanted to. My father and one of the others asked something along the lines of, it isn't loaded, I presume. The hunter said of course it isn't, and handed me the gun. The moment I took it, it went off, hitting his 7-year-old daughter, who came running from the backside of the house, more or less in the middle of the chest. She was dead before the ambulance arrived. She was their only child and had celebrated her 7th birthday just days prior. The aftermath was a lot of police investigations and a generally bad time. It felt like I fell down a dark, empty hole and shut myself completely in. I don't remember much from the years that followed. I existed, but that was it. Legally, I was acquitted. Everyone agreed that the hunting neighbor had stated the gun wasn't loaded and that he practically insisted on me holding it. The hunter himself got some kind of suspended jail sentence. The years since has been bad for most involved. The hunter was divorced from his wife shortly after. I heard he got some kind of depression and apparently has been in and out of a mental hospital. His wife is consumed by hatred and shows up to threaten me anytime she can find me. I have moved repeatedly and even changed my name, but she still finds me regularly. I have filed several court orders against her, and she is forbidden to come closer than a few kilometers from me, but that doesn't stop her. She has never hurt me physically, though, but she usually say that she'll kill me one day. My father took this very hard and was in dark place for years. He is now retired and spends most of his time doing various volunteer work for youth organizations and the like. I know it is way of doing some kind penance. My mother died a few years ago and was an amazing support for me, even though we never discussed the incident or the dead girl. I was never able to get back into any kind of meaningful education, barely managing to finish my country's version of high school. I now live and work with my brother, and I'm doing kinda okay. I never speak to anyone about this, except my father. TLDR. Neighbor asked if I wanted to hold his rifle, it went off, killing his daughter. Edit. I didn't intend to ever access this account again, but just a few comments. Thanks for your sympathy, thoughts and warming words. I really means a lot. Regarding the trigger and why the gun went off, I honestly don't know. I probably put my finger on the trigger as I was handed the gun. Remember, I had never seen a live gun before. My only experience with guns was television. I haven't even been a gamer, ever, only a soccer game at a friend's house. I know the official report, which I probably have someplace, say something about the gun, the trigger and the probable reasons why it went off, but at the time I just blocked everything. I don't really feel like reading it anyway. It doesn't matter now and will only bring me pain. The mother is arrested with regular and irregular intervals, and I know she was at least heavy fined some time ago. She is regarded as a low threat according to the police, no violent history ever, and I think she is considered mostly noise and no action. This kind of court orders is not very common in my country, and I think not very high priority with the police. To be frank, I'm not very afraid of this woman. She is mostly a very unpleasant reminder of my own guilt, and every time I see her I get a very negative reaction that can last for days or weeks. My ex asked me for money for Thanksgiving dinner so she could try and smooth things over with her father. Her life had fallen apart in a horrible divorce between her parents in her senior year of high school. All her college fund was wasted in legal fees. All her prospects and privileges were ripped out from underneath her. She was already a rebel because of abuse from both parents, but nothing too bad. Some weed, alcohol, teen angst stuff. After their divorce and her mother disowning her for not lying about her side of the story in court, she moved away with her dad. Started getting into oxy. Thanksgiving rolls around. She calls me and asks for money. Seemed fine. I wanted a receipt. 6 hours later she was on heroin. There was no funeral. Barely a blurb in the paper. She was just erased. It kills me to think about how she used to be so smart and ready for the world, and how it all crushed her. Fuck drugs, fuck parents who can't even see what they are doing wrong, fuck me for trusting her. I knew she was an addict. She's gone now. Edit. Spelling and grammar. I'm not rereading this. Edit 2. Thank you to those who have kind words to say. Edit 3. I can't believe this blew up to over 3k upvotes. I'd like to graciously thank all of you, and I feel for all who have been through similar. It's places like Reddit that will help you get by if you can see past the trolls. Thank you. Final edit. Thank you for the gold. Again, I appreciate the thought. I just wanted to vent, but I'm doing fine really. She was the first girl I ever loved, and part of me always knew, after everything went south for her, that her suicide was always a possibility. I regret not calling the appropriate authorities before it got that bad, more than even the money I gave her that she used to kill herself. I know it would not have mattered, and I know I could only have done so much to make a real difference. But I want everyone else to know that when someone cannot handle this world and its harsh realities, it's not your fault. I'm at least partially responsible for 3 deaths. So I'm a weather forecaster. A few years ago I was forecasting for Afghanistan. Now, we were doing these forecasts from a base in the States, which means we had to coordinate our forecast with someone who was deployed to Afghanistan. Sometimes the downrange forecaster was really experienced, other times they weren't. It was a mixed bag. Anyway, I had been forecasting for this region for at least 2 years at the time of this incident. I was familiar with it, and I was actually in a supervisory capacity, simply overseeing all of the forecasts going out in my zone. Well, one day I was talking with one of my forecasters about the potential for large hail, and how I'd like him to put that in his forecast. Now that's a big thing to put in a forecast, because of how operationally significant it is. Aircraft must be put in hangars, missions are cancelled, assets must be protected, etc. So when it came time to discuss this with the downrange forecaster, he was absolutely against it. He didn't want to brief that to the commander because again, missions have to be cancelled based on what you think will happen. If you're wrong, you've set back a lot of point people and wasted a lot of time. So the deployed forecaster tries to argue against it, but his reasoning really just boiled down to I don't want to brief that. So when I wasn't looking, he essentially just pulled rank on my junior forecaster and forced him to take it out of the forecast. And so it went out to the base with no hail in it, only hinting at some vicinity thunderstorms. Well, when I noticed I was pissed, but I said screw it, we'll let him be wrong. This was the first time I'd ever wanted to put large hail in a forecast. Maybe we were over forecasting it. Nope. Basically right on schedule, a huge thunderstorm popped up and dumped large hail on the base. It did a few million in damage to aircraft, injured a hello pilot who was pre-flighting his bird, and killed 3 Afghan National Army soldiers who had left on a patrol and couldn't find any cover. They wound up beaten to death by hail. That has always bugged me. They didn't need to die. We knew the potential was there, and I basically just let an incorrect forecast go out that got them killed. I was skiing with my friends on a school trip. As we went to sit on the chairlift, our skis locked. The way that happened meant that one of my friends ended up sighting on top of the other. The lift operator didn't stop the lift and we couldn't get off by the time we realized what was happening. It was my job to pull the ski bar down, but I couldn't due to the positing of people in the lift. Long story short, my friend ended up slipping, and I was holding on to her as she dangled off the lift. I was wearing thick skiing gloves, so my grip on her was loose. She was screaming so much, but she stopped for a second, looked me in the eye and said, "Please don't let go." And then my grip gave in, and she fell about 4 stories into some rocks near a river. We were shouting at the lift operator, but he was too slow to react. The girl died from internal bleeding and shock, as her legs twisted in a faked up way when she landed. She went into cardiac arrest and died. I was questioned profusely by the police, and was treated as a suspect. I was bullied endlessly, both online and IRL. In the end I blamed myself, and I still do to this day. This really is the nutshell version, but out of respect to people involved, I won't give any details, since it was only 4 to 5 years ago. Edit. Thanks for the supportive comments, I really appreciate them all. I used to work a strange overnight schedule. 10-hour shifts Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'd try and keep awake the same hours on my days off, especially on Thursdays. This was a pretty rural area, so there wasn't much open at those hours, except a gas station that had a tiny cafe area. I didn't want to keep people in the house awake, so I spent a lot of time at the gas station. I'd usually read or talk with the cashier on duty. I think she felt a little safer having someone else there too. One night a man comes in with a little boy and asks if they can use the bathroom. It's something like 3 AM. The kid looks sick or uncomfortable. To me it looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. After they're in the bathroom, the cashier and I look at each other. She thinks there's something off about this too. I went outside to get a description of the vehicle. After they leave we call the police. The local police passed it along to the county sheriff's department and a local officer came to the gas station. He asked us a couple more questions and we listened to his radio to hear what was happening. A county officer spots the truck and pulls it over. After the officer gets out of the car, the truck backs into it and takes off. The police pursue him. We didn't get a lot of details after that. He crashed or abandoned the truck. The truck was on fire and loose rounds of ammunition was going off in the truck. I believe the boy was somewhere safe because I didn't hear any more about him. The guy tried to swim across a small but deceptively treacherous river and he drowned. That was close to 20 years ago. If I remember correctly, he was the boy's dad, but did not have custody. He was recently released from prison and the truck was stolen. Edit. At the time of the story, the man had been recently released from prison prior to stealing the truck and drowning. Throwaway because I'd rather not have this associated with my main account. When I was 12, one of my guy friends my age had a crush on me and would do anything to get my attention and praise. Being young and stupid without a shred of empathy, I would make him do a lot of dumb stuff. Usually silly kid stuff like licking something dirty or posting something stupid on social media. One time, I pressured him into playing chicken at the train tracks with our friends. You can guess what happened next. I don't remember if it was because he mistimed it or got stuck or something else. I remember that's all I could think about afterwards when I was in shock. Just that one insignificant stupid little detail. Did he get stuck? Did he not jump in time? I think it was my way of trying to deal with it. I'll never forgive myself for that. Ever. Edit. I'm putting this edit at the bottom around 2 hours after the original comment posted. The reason for this edit is because I wanted to address the two main replies I've been getting before new people jump to post the same thing. These are wow, you suck and wow, these people saying you suck. I'm sorry for what happened. I'm alright with people saying mean things about this. This is a natural reaction. I'm in no way angry at any of you people saying these things. You are 100% justified in that reaction. To those giving me sympathy and sticking up for me, thank you, but kindly refrain. Don't argue with people's emotional response to a post so deeply upsetting as this. I know that's a big thing to ask, but if you want to be sympathetic towards me, that's the way of showing it. Thank you everyone. I was the first car at a red light, with a grey car to my right in the right lane. I picked up a habit to look both ways when a light turns green, and it never proved worth it until now. So my light turns green, and before I go, I check left and right like usual. This time, I see a red truck speeding at least 100 miles per hour trying to make his red light. 2 whole seconds pass, and I'm still waiting, but the grey car to my right didn't see the red truck speeding, so he went along. Huge collision. The grey car that was to my right is now rolled over, hitting 2 other cars in the other lanes, and the red truck that sped through hardly had a front anymore. This happened no more than 5 meters away from me. I think I was in such shock that I proceeded on my way without much consideration or checking up on them or anything, which would be one of my greatest regrets. I always wonder what would have happened if I did not check left or right before going. Probably wouldn't be typing this, to be honest. Also, that grey car wouldn't have been T-boned and flipped, so I have a bit of survivor's guilt I guess about that. I wish there was a way to reach out and see what happened to that grey car. I hope he or she and all their passengers are alright. I often use this story as a cautionary tale about always checking before going, even if your light is green. Green doesn't mean go, it means proceed if safe. Not exactly caused by me, but I was definitely part of it. When we were 15 or 16, we had a guy in school who got bullied real hard and ended up committing suicide. I remember being quite nice to him whenever we were on our own, but being quite insecure myself at the time. I've also been a douche to him in the group a few times. It was definitely life-changing and shaped my character to the better. It's just scary that you completely fail to realize what such actions can do to somebody when you're a teenager. Edit. On a side note, there were definitely more things to it, as we have realized afterwards. He immigrated to us from Albania, had no father and certainly nobody to talk to about these things. Close before his death, he openly dealt with satanic rituals and such. At that time he also had a girlfriend who shared these things with him, and probably also had a hard time. Regarding the questions about how everyone felt, I can't even say how the real bullies felt after that. We haven't been talking about it much anymore. I can definitely say that no never came out with how much he has liked him or such, but I suppose they have all been in sorrow privately. I know that they have all turned into more or less good people after all. Also, despite the fact that I accept having been part of it, I still don't consider myself a bully. I was also always on the lower end of the food chain, as I developed very late, and looking like a young boy in a class of 30 young men is definitely a thing you need to stand. But still, there is no excuse to ever join such a bully train on a weaker guy. The most important conclusion I have from that time is that you as a parent are asked more than ever to deal with the problems of your child and never let him out alone in the rain. Teenagers can be so incredibly cruel, and they don't have ability to realize the impact of such actions. I wouldn't say I caused this death, but this is kind of in that realm. But my roommate's dad died most likely while I was in the other room, oblivious that he was at our house. He was in town for a few days for an appointment he had for heart surgery later this day. I woke up early for homework before class, and he texted me to borrow my truck to go to the convenience store, so I gave him the keys, finished my work, then went to class. After he got back, I got back from class maybe 2 or 3 hours later, and about an hour or 2 after that, my second roommate, not the son, came home, and shortly after my roommates, the son's mom came to the house in a sweat, asking where the dad was. She said she had called him several times and he didn't pick up. We went into my roommate's room, and there he was. But he wasn't sleeping. It was different, you could tell. Anyways, we got him down, and I performed CPR, while the others called the cops. They were there fast. But he didn't make it. I think they thought I would blame myself. The EMTs or whatever they're called each told me that I did everything right, probably didn't want me to blame myself. And I don't. But if I had known, maybe it would have been different. I'm almost certain that I was in the other room when he died, but just never knew. I didn't know just how serious his heart condition was until after all of this. I was a manager at a theater, and it was the responsibility of the manager to make sure every last person left before you go right. Caitlin didn't have a car, but was the best, nicest, kindest, hardworking 18-year-old I had met in a while. I didn't mind taking her home down this curvy backwoods road every night. Caitlin would sing me gospel while I drove, and she had an amazing voice. She sang at church choir. Well, one night I was exhausted. I had worked 2 long shifts back to back. I wasn't sure I should be driving, much less taking someone else home. So I asked another employee, not their job, they reminded me. I know, and I pressed anyways. Caitlin asked if it was okay. I said sure, everything is fine. And I watched as I put her in, called her mom, so they knew a different car was coming, and went home. Next day at work I was pulled aside as soon as I got there and was told they had an accident. The girl, Tiffany, that I asked never drove on dirt roads and said she took the curve too fast. She was injured for life and will never walk straight again. Beautiful Caitlin died. Her mother came in that night and saw me, walked right up to me, and stated, smacking me in the face, screaming I had killed her daughter by making the decision for her. I watched her collapse in anguish, squeezing my arms, and I just let her in front about 3k people. I felt tears rolling down my hot face. Regardless of what people say, I still after 12 years blame myself. I think of her often, and I suppose I might forever. Edit. Thank you so much for all the kind words. When my thoughts wander, I will look back on them. Thank you again. This isn't exactly along the thread, but it's very close, and I'd just like to say it. Cathartic, or whatever the hell that is. I wasn't the full thing that caused it. I was this guy's boss. I had recently been promoted, and was usually very relaxed. My exact words usually were, I don't give a fuck if you're doing meth in the back, so long as you get your job done. We got 3 new guys, a couple years younger than me. I was around 23, these guys were 18 to 21. One guy was slow as hell, one guy gave no facts, and the third guy, I thought he was dumb or just making poor life choices. I knew he'd been trying to get into the Air Force, but beyond that, and a girl we both knew that we both, at one point, had the hots for, we didn't have much in common. Well, he'd have things go wrong in his life, like getting stuck in traffic, and being 2 hours late. Exhaustion and therefore messing up. Poor memory, and he'd have to ask me the same thing 20 times. It didn't help that he was friends with the guy who didn't give a fuck. They'd gone out a couple times. Douchebag was probably just using him as a DD though. So I ended up being a dick to him. Nearly fired him. I was trying to get him to start doing well, cause I liked him, but I'm not a nice person. So it probably didn't come out how I meant it at all. He killed himself. Turns out he was supporting his family in pretty much minimum wage, 8.09 at the time, if I remember correctly. That's 2 sisters and 2 parents. I don't know much about the parents, but from the snippets I got, they were manipulating him and guilt tripping him into paying for their bad habits. The only reason he stayed is because of his sisters. The military was his only real chance at helping them out, since he was already working 3 jobs. Also didn't know that, and still not making enough. I'm aware it's not my fault, entirely. But I found out a lot about him the day after he died. And I'll always know that however small the part one played was, I did not have a positive effect on him. I never really gave a fuck when people said you don't know what random person is going through. I'd think they're all dumb as or as holes. Some kinda as. Now, though, I think I get it. Edit. I'll clarify a couple points when I'm on break. But right now I'm just gonna say I was assistant manager, which changes a lot of the context of my getting on his case to my boss yelling at him and me just being the medium. Does not absolve me, but it changes things. Sorry for lack of clarity, thought this would just get glanced over and ignored. Edit 2, as I said, I was the assistant, which meant outside of a write-up, I had no power. Union store, so write-up means nothing, really. I was mainly a conduit for my boss anger. I'm not nice, in that I don't go out of my way to be nice and friendly. Poker face, honest opinions, and will call people out on shit. A lot of people do not like that, even when they say they do. How I was a dick example, one time he was 2 hours late. This is in a kitchen retail blend, so not really acceptable. Why he was late? He was filling out paperwork for the Air Force. There was an accident. He got stuck in stop and go traffic. Understandable, but still bad. Since he called the store and talked to middle management, I had no choice but to really get on his case. He'd also show up late because he worked graves at the airport. I did not know this at the time and was getting what sleep he could. This also made him slower and more forgetful. I did try to be positive at times, asking him what he thinks he should do and encouraging him to problem solve, but I'll admit that I was short-tempered a lot because I got stuck with the role of managing 3 new people and everything that went wrong. There's always something with my boss fell directly on me. Why I didn't know these things, I did talk to him when we had time, but he didn't open up much about his life. And he was only there a few months maximum. I can't actually remember how long. Yes, I feel like a jerk because of that. And even the co-worker he was friends with had no clue about how stressful his life was. Would say more, but out of time. Edit 3. Got a couple minutes to say this. No, I don't want sympathy. I faked up, and to tragic effect. Actually expected to see -1k, because I'm completely aware I handled things poorly. No, I'm not a manager of any sort anymore. I didn't want to be in the first place. I was just the most qualified and needed the money, and we had to have an assistant. I left a few months later, came back, and do not intend to move up again. Workplace info, dominated by older women who are, I don't really know how to put it kindly, they're very irritable and constantly have something angry/negative to say about everyone. If I don't hear a 10-minute story about something sometime that was completely idiotic, do they have any brain cells left? It's a good day. That's why I always tried to be the relaxed one, but even I had to crack down sometimes. Fuck it, I'll reply. I haven't told many of my friends this story, but sharing it has helped wrap my head around what happened. It was about 3 AM on a Thursday last December. I lived in Fort Lauderdale at the time. I was heading back from a party at a friend's house, pretty bleary-eyed. I had slept for a few hours, and then got in my car. I was running out of gas, so I stop at a gas station right off of I-95 before heading north to home. A guy walks up to me while I'm pumping gas, and he asks for directions. He was older and a bit drunk. He came off as a Yachty, and Yachties are really common in that part of town. I had a bunch of Yachty friends, so he didn't sketch me out, but I immediately kind of wrote him off. I told him to take I-95 north. He stumbles off and gets on his Vespa. Scooters are super common in South Florida, and then drives away. I go inside, get a drink, then sit in my car for a few minutes, waking up before going. I hit the highway and I'm cruising north when I see a ton of emergency lights coming down the southbound side. I remember thinking, oh shit, something's going down. I start paying closer attention to the road in front of me and there are lights in my rear view too, coming up really faking gassed. What happened next was kind of a blur and is NWS. There were recognizable body parts in the road, part of an arm, an upper torso with the head attached, blood everywhere, bits and pieces of plastic and metal in the road and lumps of flesh or organ or something. I didn't see any of it until I was extremely close, but the image is something that has really faked me up. I called my mom, she said I was incoherent and screaming about blood. FHP checked my car, which had blood on it but no damage, the next day, and the officer explained to me an older white male on a scooter had gotten on I-95 North. He merged inappropriately and was hit by a dump truck, and his corpse was hit by several other vehicles including mine. They closed I-95 for the entire morning, well past rush hour. The news article said that remains and debris was strewn across an area the size of a football field. I sold my car and moved. The first 2 months were very rough, but I'm feeling better now. Despite shaking ATM, TLDR, I told a stranger to take the highway. He did so on a scooter. I drove through the aftermath of my advice. Haven't told anyone what happened, but my friend's little brother who had cerebral palsy was asleep on his back, and my friend slept in a room beside his, and I had to spend the night with my friend's little bro, because there was a spare bed in his brother's room. Basically around 2 AM I went to pee and came back, and his little brother was coughing a lot, and I thought he'd be okay, but he then started to cough more violently and vigorously, and I started to get scared, and not knowing what to do I climbed into the separate bed, and didn't tell anyone. About 30 minutes later he was coughing again, and he started to puke, and I jumped up to see if he was alright. Keep in mind he couldn't stand or even sit up on his own and could only use one arm fully, and the vomit was extremely acidic and I just had to throw up myself, so I ran and threw up in the bathroom, and about 15 minutes later came back and his little brother was no longer coughing or throwing up, so I thought he was okay and got his parents who came and checked on him. His dad called the police immediately because he choked and had suffocated in it. As you could imagine, 9-year-old me didn't know what to do in the situation and was in pure shock of the kid, and his whole family thought I watched as his little brother was dying and choking. I've since moved from there and haven't told anyone about it because everyone called me a murderer. Edit: wow, didn't think anyone would really see this, but thank you for the kind words and help. Never knew Reddit was so thoughtful and full of great people. Bleach.